Welcome everybody to this fantastic webinar, which has got a great title, The True Magic of Toddlers. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all in. And as you all start coming into the webinar, what I can tell you is that we've had to change the format away from Zoom into a webinar because we've just had so many people sign up. So we're not in the old Zoom town hall format, we're in this webinar format, which sadly means we can't see all your smiling faces, but it's still, it's the technology that allows us to cope with so many people coming in. So thank you so much for all signing up. And it's great to see so many of you joining in at the moment. So we'll just allow a little bit of time for you all to come into the room. I should tell you that I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Whadjuk people in the Noongar Nation here in Perth. And across the nation, we're all gathering on lands of Aboriginal people, and we acknowledge their continuing connection with their country and of course their continuing leadership, and how critical this issue of early childhood is to the thriving development of all children, but Aboriginal children in particular. So thank you all for participating in today. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce you to this event. I'll begin with just a few preliminaries. We are, of course, recording this session to be uploaded online later, so please be respectful and don't say anything you wouldn't say in a public face-to-face forum, because there will be a permanent record there. There is a chat function, so please use it to ask questions or to make a comment, and you can jump right into the chat straight away and introduce yourself and tell us where you're coming from, which lands you might also be on at the moment. And we encourage people to use their full names, and if you're representing an organisation, if you could also include the name of the organisation, that will just help us orient ourselves and also get back to you. If you're having any technical difficulties, don't hesitate to use the chat and our technical support people, Carla or AFSA, will jump on and help you navigate that challenge. So welcome everyone. This couldn't be a more important topic, and I don't think we could have two more qualified people to assist us in navigating our way through it. Can I begin first by introducing to you all Maggie Dent, somebody that probably requires, somebody who requires little introduction to this group, but Maggie is of course one of Australia's favourite parenting authors and educators, with a particular interest in the early years, adolescence, and the critical issue of resilience. Maggie's experience includes teaching in secondary schools, counselling, and working in the palliative care, funeral services and suicide prevention areas. She's an author of 7 major books, a host of the ABC podcast Parental as Anything, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Maggie here today. Welcome, Maggie.
Well, thanks, Jay.
Yeah.
I'm extremely excited, really excited, because as a nanny, I'm right back in this window. So I'm all over this, seriously. The good, the bad, the frustrating, and the absolutely fantastic. I've got it all covered.
Excellent. Thanks, Maggie. So maybe we could kick off by just asking you, what really sparked your interest in the early years, and in particular the system that exists or doesn't exist to support us in the early years?
Well, I guess it started when I was still teaching, and I would, look around my classrooms and go, gee, some kids just seem to be thriving, even if they're not academically capable, and some don't, and I started to question, what was that? And then when I stepped out and did full-time counselling and started working with troubled kids and teens, then we started to dive into how families can help support them better. And I started to realise that so much of the stuff that either let you shine in adolescence or struggle in adolescence all sort of was laid down in those first 5 years. So that's where I decided to figure it all out. And I've been kind of researching it for the last 15 to 16 years. So that's kind of where it all started. I love a problem and I like to find solutions, and that's why I'm loving doing what we're doing today.
Yeah, well, thanks, Maggie. I might also just introduce you all to our other special guest, Dr. Kaylene Henderson. Kaylene, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Okay.
And Kaylene is a medically trained child health specialist and a trusted professional development provider for the early years sector, and really one of Australia's leading parenting experts. She's also a mother of 3 young children. And in her warm, relatable style, Kaylene shares practical, research-based advice to parents and professionals alike, hoping that together we can bring out the best for our children that we all look after. So, Dr. Kaylene, what is it about the early years, and in particular the system that exists that interests you most from your professional perspective?
I think as Maggie alluded to, just actually knowing how incredibly important those first 5 years is. So I did my medical degree in Queensland, just to give you a little bit of background, specialised in psychiatry and subspecialised in child and adolescent psychiatry. And part of that training exposed me to, I guess, a lot of learning about childhood brain development, developmental outcomes, optimising developmental outcomes for our children. And I guess it really hit me during my training, and then going on to become a mother myself, how incredibly vital it is that we get those first 5 years right. Because when we get that really healthy foundation right for our children, we really do set them up for success. So for me personally, with that knowledge on board, I actually took a step back from clinical work, and I took a role in providing education to parents and early years educators, because I figured, to be honest, that I could best serve children by sharing what I learned in my training with ultimately the people who spend the most amount of time with young children, who are parents and early years educators. That made sense that I share what I'm fortunate enough to know from the research, from the evidence, from my training, with the people who ultimately can make a more powerful difference than I ever could. So with that kind of passion driving me, I went into providing education, seminars, resources, etc. for parents, but also training for the early years sector, knowing that if we're all on the same page, then we can really bring about enormous benefit for our next generation of children.
Yeah, it's a wonderful vision. And it reminds me of the phrase that Professor Donna Cross here at Telethon Kids Institute here uses about the role of practitioners. And she talks about them being the bridge between the science and the parents. And it sounds like, because parents, while we talk about a system, obviously, even the best system of the world, the overwhelming time is spent between parents and children, and they're the heart of how we care and develop those youngest Australians. So let's leap into the discussion. Let's start with toddler development, especially language development. I remember once seeing a little graph that Fraser Mustard showed us about the language development in a child's brain, and frighteningly, the peak exists at 7 months. And I thought, goodness, I thought they only started talking when they were 2 years of age. So that was a bit of a challenge to me with a couple of babies. So Maggie, can I get you to start? What can you tell us about brain development in a child's first few years of life? And how critical is that developmental phase?
Oh, look, it's just fascinating that when you really dive into exactly what Kaylene's saying, that our babies from the get-go, from the moment they are born, their brain is more underdeveloped than any other species, because if we had them able to come on out and say, hi, mum, well, the brain would have had to be bigger, and we don't want a bigger brain coming out the birth canal. So essentially it's underdeveloped. So, but the moment it's out, every single input into the sensory system is growing that brain. And if you can keep that in mind, that babies and toddlers are never not learning, and that, just being able to stare or go for a toddler walk and have a dead leaf absorb their attention for about 10 minutes might be boring the bat poo out of mum and dad, or whoever's with them, but they are interpreting that through their senses into that amazing brain. And it's just, the synapses are growing so much. So I guess one thing I want to start with is that the capacity for that brain to grow amazingly is dependent on the safety of the relationship that they are marinated in, regardless of whether it's a solo parent or step parents or, grandparents caring for children. Obviously, we'd love it to be two parents at least, because let's be honest, toddlers can be really hard work. Now, I'm a nanny in that window at the moment, and I'm like, my goodness, I have the patience of a saint because I've raised 4 boys. And there are days I'm looking at it going, I think I need a deep breath right now. The meltdowns or the disagreements over the wrong color cup. And at the moment, we've got one of my grandsons who's decided that the food he loved last week, once he makes him gag. And this is all the autonomous growth that's meant to be happening at the same time. So they're trying to develop a sense of self, and they're trying to separate from me being completely you. And that's a bit tricky. And that's where some of the need to try and control my toddler. I still feel we've got a misunderstanding that when they challenge us, that isn't naughty behavior, that is actually healthy, development. And that the moments that they do something with their senses, let's look at your very favorite body balm that you've been saving for the weekend you're going away with your girlfriends, that has now been smeared on the cupboard, the carpet, the dog, their face, the mirror. Every single interaction with those surfaces has just been exploding brain cells. So my biggest challenge to you is see those behaviors that really frustrating as potential toddler geniuses. The unraveling of the toilet roll, the lipstick all over your high chair, or your even younger baby. So I want you to, that's a really important thing to see, that this is all how they learn, how they develop. So you don't need expensive toys, and they are never not learning. So again, I think the pressure on parents is to buy things that have got educational written on them, or they look like they're going to be stimulating. And I'm going to tell them that overstimulating toddlers can also be problematic, because when they're doing it in their own way, in their own time, which is frustratingly slow some days, that is exactly their optimal brain development. So you can't always measure it. As you said, that language one, and I know that Kaylene's going to talk about that in a moment, that, the marination of real human language, to be able to communicate, they are watching our faces, and there's got to be lots of face to face. But guess what's got in the road? Phones. And my heart aches when I can see, a mummy who's trying to entertain a toddler with her phone in the supermarket, thinking that will keep them entertained so they won't have a meltdown or be awful, when in actual fact, you're missing that opportunity of, well, what's that over there? And what's the color of that? And how many fingers are crawling up your hand? So it's the constant interaction with human beings in a safe, mildly stimulating environment that really allows them to be able to thrive. And then the other thing is there's a whole child developing in there. So a lot of people think it's about, if the brain's smart, the child will be smart. In this marinating of experiences, they're learning their self-regulating systems, their capacity to bring themselves down from distress. The only voice they have as a baby is to cry. And so again, the crying is trying to communicate to us how we can help them. And yeah, that's pretty tricky if you're being up and down doing the floorboards for hours with babies, thinking I'm the worst person on the planet, the parent, I'm a failed parent. No, you're not. We know that some of our babies take more tenderness and patience to develop. Oh, I'm safe. Yeah, it's not a bad baby. It's not a lousy parent. It's just that there's these fundamental big differences that I think the world has got a bit judgy about those things, and people keep trying to tell you what you should do and what you're doing wrong. So self-regulating systems are incredibly, incredibly important. And that means if you do need to be co-sleeping with your 2.5-year-old who's suddenly gone from being a wonderful sleeper to being in your bed all the time, there will be a need coming from their developing brain that is needing more comfort during the night time. And we can link that through the neuroscience. So we meet the need, and eventually you'll be able to get them back in their own words. So once again, it is really quite stressful. And if you've got a toddler and a new baby, whoa, you've got 2 lots of differing brain developments and behaviors that you're trying to meet. And again, what we really need to know is the relationship, the attachment, the sense of, can you hold me while I'm unable to hold myself, while I haven't got the capacity to manage the big feelings? Then that is really what pays off later. So it is not only our caring parents, co-parents, extended family, and that, you know, I've been locked out of WA, so I've been missing my two little grandies over there. But it's also then, if we want to work, or we need to be able to work, then who are the ones who step into that place? And our early childhood educators become what we call secondary attachment people. And they know the number one thing is not teaching them necessarily how to read off cue cards, is relationship. So as soon as our toddlers are safe in another environment, then they can co-regulate to that big person while they're away from their other big person who keeps them safe. So again, every single child will do this differently, but I think they're the key things that every single moment is going through their senses, growing a whole child, and the brain's right at the core of it all.
Excellent. Thank you, Maggie. That's a beautiful set of images and language there that allows us to understand how children develop. So, Dr. Kaylene, can you just give us a little bit of information about how important the exposure to language is early on for a child's own language development?
Yeah, it's incredibly important, Jay. As Maggie said, I mean, what we know about children's developing brains in those first few years is that children are making an incredible 1 million neural connections a second. That's amazing. And one of the really important ways we can help children to be able to develop their cognitive skills, to be able to engage in relationship with them, to set them up for future school success, is to expose them to lots of language, to lots of vocabulary. Now, obviously, we do this, as Maggie suggested, through spoken language. You know, talking to our babies from very early on, as you mentioned, Jay, it's incredibly important. Sometimes parents say to me, you know, there's no point talking to a baby because they can't talk back. But we know that babies actually learn to understand language long before they can use it themselves. So it makes sense that we use lots of language with them from very early on. And to also, when we do that, we're not just teaching them or exposing them to vocab and exposing them to language, we're also teaching them conversation skills. You know, even if you've got a very little baby, you know, on your lap and you're having a little bit of a conversation with them, you know, waiting for them to finish cooing at you or babbling at you, and then responding in turn, and then allowing them to have another turn. You're also teaching them early conversational skills and turn taking, and, you know, all these things that are going to benefit their overall social skills later on. So there's benefits that surpass simple, you know, language literacy, school-related benefits, which are very clear. We also know that when we think about language exposure, it's not just about the spoken word. You know, we can sing to our babies, to our children, sing nursery rhymes, sing about doing the dishes, whatever it might be, what kind of day it looks like outside. Babies and young children are incredibly forgiving of, you know, poor vocal technique and ridiculous made-up songs. And reading to children is obviously incredibly important. Actually, I came across this really interesting study that came out of the Ohio State University last year, and it's talking about the gap between children who've been read to very rarely, or almost never, compared with children who are read to quite consistently, say up to 5 books a day, or in my experience as a parent, that's often the same book 5 times a day by the time they hit school age. And the difference in how many words they've literally been exposed to is in the order of 1.4 million words. Now, you can imagine that children who are exposed to 1.4 million more words than their peers are going to be far better set up for learning early literacy and to engaging in school and succeeding in school when they get there. And as Maggie mentioned too, the other disclaimer there, when we're talking about, you know, spoken words, songs, books, screens don't seem to count. It's really interesting the way children's brains are wired. Putting them in front of a TV show where they're exposed to language doesn't seem to count towards their quota of words that benefit their language development. So that's really important for parents to know as well, I think. It's those interactions with people that really make the difference.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Doctor. So what should parents expect from, say, their toddlers? When would they imagine they would start talking?
Children often start talking about the 12 months of age mark. You know, there's obviously variation as there is with across all the domains of development. What I say, so some will start to speak earlier, some a little later. What I do say to parents is if their child isn't speaking by, say, 18 months of age, it's a good time to take their child to the GP and to get that checked, because it might be a matter of sending their child for a hearing test and perhaps finding that they've got glue ear or something affecting their hearing that's made it really hard for them to work out how to reproduce those sounds when it sounds like they're hearing sounds underwater. So 18 months is around the age that you get things checked. But if a parent has any concerns any earlier, you know, if their 12-month-old isn't babbling or isn't gesturing or pointing, then equally don't hesitate to go and seek advice on that. I always say to parents, you know, knowing how important those early years are, knowing how many neural connections they're making every second, you know, it's the earlier, the better you get in with these things. Yeah. It's always better to take your child to have something checked, even if it's to be told there's nothing wrong, than to look back and wish you had. So that's the advice I would share there.
Yeah, and trust your judgment about those things. Parents often have an instinct about these things that they should be, you know, confident to follow.
Absolutely.
So I don't know whether you had this experience, but I certainly, when I first was exposed to this work through Fraser Mustard's work in South Australia on this early childhood development, I all of a sudden felt, well, I wish I'd known about some of these things a little earlier, because they just seem so powerful. Were there any of those insights for you, when what you learnt from your specialist training and how that probably affected your parenting?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. The one that really stands out for me was learning about the importance of delight, actually. Delight's really interesting. It's the way you communicate it non-verbally. It's the way your eyes light up, the way your face lights up, and the way your body turns towards someone when you're with them. And it communicates, I'm delighted that you exist. You know, you haven't had to do anything, say anything. I'm just delighted that you exist. Now, the really interesting thing I learnt in my training is that babies who've been shown more delight, it actually promotes brain development, which I think is actually magic. That the way you hold yourself can promote the brain development in another human. But it also shows, the research also suggests that babies who've been shown more delight grow into more cooperative 2-year-olds. So that's a cracking incentive that I was happy to take on. But the other thing I learned, and which I was really grateful to have learned actually, is that when children are shown delight consistently by their parents or their you know, alternative caregivers, it provides for them an internalized sense that I must be an inherently good and worthwhile person if I can make someone as important as you light up just by existing. And it links with the research. The research tells us that the foundation for self-esteem development in our children is being delighted. So I was actually really grateful to learn that. I mean, my children are thankfully delightful humans, and I am grateful that they exist. But I will admit, I think, to be honest, as a busy parent, it gets lost, I think, in the busyness of the day or in the challenges that Maggie's talking about, you know, the chaos of toddlerhood. We can sometimes forget to demonstrate for our children how genuinely delighted we are that they exist. But I think that reminder for me about how valuable that is for our kids was really powerful. Yeah,
no, it reminds me of something that I learned from Reggio Emilia, you know, that school of pedagogy, and their byline is "in everything joy." And it does seem to me to be a really powerful idea. Maggie, turning back to you now, and we're going to talk about this idea of movement and play. And I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of information about the importance of movement for toddlers. I remember some occupational therapists sort of telling me when I was back in the day when I was early childhood development minister that they were seeing some concerns about the physical development of children that we're seeing coming through the school system. So can you perhaps reflect on that?
Definitely. So And this is something that we're finding right across Australia, definitely, is that the teachers of 5-year-olds are telling me that we can notice a significant drop in oral vocab over the last few years, which of course Kaylene has touched on, poorer gross and fine motor skills, inability to self-regulate, which is also linked back to movement, and an inability to initiate and sustain play with other children. So these are kind of fundamental things that used to already be in place. So we need to look at what are the things that contribute to that. Now, and that was something that came out of the research, that if you look at the containers that exist for parents today, that didn't exist, years ago, and it definitely didn't exist within our, traditional kinship communities. So what we do is we restrain their capacity to move as freely and as much as they used to. So they are meant to be on floors. Obviously, we're very careful we don't tread on them and things, because while they're on the floor, they will actually be making the body movements that they need to develop their core strength for when they are, biologically ready to roll over and crawl. So again, it's really, really important that if you allow that, there are still little ones who can sit. And even in my playgroup way back, we had a little girl who sat and never moved for 18 months. And she had been checked out. She's perfectly happy. I think it was because everyone in playgroup, all the kids brought stuff to her. So she thought, why bother? She's actually a very competent OT today. So again, not necessarily comparing your child to every other child is a really important thing. But the movement is also the cross-patterning movement of crawling. When we look at the fundamental thing it does in the brain, it's unbelievably important. Crossing the midline, that's a really important thing for learning to read. So if our children aren't rolling around on the floor and doing all these things, now what's tricky is when your toddler takes off, before you know it, you can't find them. And we've got my youngest little grandson is 8 months, and he's off like a rocket crawling all over the bed. He's now in climbing. Now, climbing's enough to give anybody a heart attack with a little one who's already climbed. And, they can climb up onto a kitchen bench and they can't walk. And you're going, oh my God, there's something wrong. Well, can we just be behind them? And just in case they do tumble off there, because this is actually the development they're needing right now. So they are doing some gripping, they're doing some balancing. And what we do know with toddlers, especially as they grow through to 3, 4, and 5, in play opportunities, they'll tend to take themselves to the edge of their own fear, their own level. And then next time they come back, they do it a little bit more. And this is how they gradually grow in their bravery, overcome mild moments of anxiety. And of course, again, it's the like spinning and spinning and spinning. We know that the brain absolutely has to do a lot of that for the cerebellum, which is it's a part of our balancing system, but a lot of other things, spinning, tumbling, balancing, and rolling. So I've taken my little one up to a park that's not far from where I live, ready to be on the swings, and there's all these, and she's just wanted to walk up and down the rock wall. That's all I did the whole time, 20 minutes up and down. We went one more time, she did it, she's never done it again. So the gradual up of incline is another one of those developments. But if you're in a hurry, you'll miss them wanting to do that. And you'll go, no, come on, the swings look like more fun. Does that make sense? So that movement, and every now and then they want to run. And if you've got little boys, there's this stage, and it's somewhere between 18 months and 2.5. They just want to run unbelievably long distances from where you are. And I have noticed that and if we keep catching them, they haven't done it. So you need to find an enormous oval and let them run to as far as the other end. Obviously it's fenced, because they've got to get that out of their system so they don't need to do it again. Otherwise they're going to drive you mad for months and months. Maybe you do it a little bit and then they just don't do it as much. So can you see? They've kind of got a little computer in their head that's telling them what they need to be doing. So then one of those other one, the spinning, tumbling, balancing, and rolling, we often don't want them to roll down a hill in case they hurt themselves, or those beautiful clothes are going to get dirty. So there's the other celebration that toddlers are meant to get kind of dirty, kind of every now and then. They're meant to have ouchies and owies because they're having they've just miscalculated that step. And aren't stairs a nightmare? I mean, oh my goodness, we've got one more to go through that. That you watch behind them and you might help them with a leg, and then they've got to master that, don't they, on how to go backwards. And then the first time they want to do standing up, you nearly have a heart attack, and you just want to pick them up and put them down But bottom line is, that's them saying, can you please help me now master stairs?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean to say we don't slip, because goodness, I'm a growing up and I've had the odd tumble down the stairs. So again, it's a really, really important thing for us to be able to understand every child has a slightly different urge, but what you
Yes.
need to do is prioritize the opportunity for movement and to support whatever they are yearning to do, even if it doesn't look like it's completely safe or makes sense to you. Yeah, so it's just they need to be moving. And I think that's why nature is so powerful, because we tend to find that children, who are climbers, will naturally find something they can climb out there in nature. And if they can't climb it, then they're not ready to, if they can't reach, they're not ready. Does that make sense again? So that's why I'm, really passionate that we need to let them be as feral and free as possible, obviously away from roads. And then my other part to that too is, if you can have those little toddlers and young ones in the company of mixed age groups, then they watch older children. And we often find that accelerates what they can do next. That's why it was great having older cousins or older neighbours or lots bigger families in the olden days. I spent my entire childhood chasing 5 other siblings above me. So again, if we recognise the sorts of things that allow them to be moving, I'm concerned they are sitting. Passivity is definitely causing some problems with our little ones. We've got 4-year-olds that are going to physiotherapists with chronic posture problems because they haven't hung by their body weight enough to strengthen the shoulder girdle, and they've had devices and things on their lap. So the two things combined creates a problem. So we're not saying, the digital world's going to go anywhere, but what we need to do is in the first 5 years, build all of the core strengths in the physical body that allow them to be able to manage that world later, so that they don't end up with those sorts of problems. So
yes. Thanks, Maggie. Now, a few people have asked about, you've touched on some research, and so we'll make sure that we get that, some of those links, and send them through to people along with the recording. So we'll do that at the end. But Doctor, just want to ask you now, how can the early learning centres work as a bridge between the research that we've been talking about the importance of play-based learning, and the parents?
Yeah, that's a great question. We know, you're talking about parent engagement there, and there's decades of research that supports the importance of parent engagement by early learning services, because it helps to optimise children's school or academic and wellbeing outcomes. So there's a lot of research around the importance of that. And parent engagement isn't just about involving parents. It's about, involving parents is really important, but it goes deeper than that. It's really about sharing, as you said, and real engagement in the child's learning, explaining what play-based learning is being done, why it's being done, how they can extend upon that at home, suggestions for how they can engage their children similarly in play-based learning approaches, because a lot of that won't come naturally to parents. At the heart of that parent engagement is really forming a team between the educator and the parent. And a team requires two-way communication. So that's really important. It's not just about imparting knowledge. It's really about creating a true partnership between parents and educators. And the first way you can do that is really by inviting parents to share their expertise on their children. So if you're looking to engage children in play-based learning opportunities, what are their child's interests? What do they find really engaging? What are their strengths? What are their interests? What are their challenges that you're hoping that you'll be able to help families overcome this year, or to better equip them as time goes on? And then when you have that expertise on board, then imparting your expertise as an educator on, well, this is why it's really important that we tackle these things together. This is why it's really important that children's learning is extended at home. These are some topics that we're learning about this week that you might want to grab some books at the local library about. This is a song we've been learning this week that here's the YouTube link so that you can sing it at home as well. Here's a conversation starter. How about you ask your child to ask your child about a game that they've learnt this week and ask them to teach it to you, but letting parents in on what's happening within the service is really important, so that parents can feel like valued teaching partners, because ultimately they are. Parents are, as we know, children's first teachers. They are incredibly vital. But what's better than either operating alone is both forming a team and educating a child together, that's ultimately much more powerful.
Yeah.
And can I just jump in there just quickly and talk about just one little thing in that journey about the power of pretend play? Because I know it's something I've found parents get a bit confused about. It's like a bit of a waste of time. And I want to say this is one of the ways they consolidate their understanding of the world through language and play. And so in the midst of the COVID-19, my 4-year-old little granddaughter came down and we were doing, she was doing doctors, and she'd come out and call them, Maggie Dent, you're next, and I'd go. And at one point she sort of said to me, so have you got a cough and have you had a temperature? And I said, no, I'm pretty good. She said, oh, good. That means you won't have the virus. And it was like her putting into her pretend play an understanding of what happens outside of that. And at one point I had a Band-Aid because I'd said from a previous appointment that I had a sore knee, and she said, how is your knee? And I said, no, it's not very good. And she said, well, you might have to go and see a new doctor. Now, I know it takes time, and our to-do list as parents is quite long, isn't it? That we would rather not play doctors or home corners or run up and down the hallway chasing whatever. But I just say it's not for hours. It's just these what I call micro connections that build, something that is important to them in the moment, but the connection with them, and it's the delight again, but that's consolidating serious language. And there is research saying that pretend play is actually one of the best ways that children consolidate big people language into their little people world. So
that's it.
Acknowledge there too, if you don't mind me butting in again, sorry, is that a lot of parents realistically find it really difficult to play with their children. They find it, they either don't know what to do because perhaps they weren't played with as a child by their parents, so it's not part of their kind of template that they've come to parenting with, or they find it really boring. A lot of parents find it really difficult. And the other wonderful thing when educators do reach out and form this partnership with a parent is that parents now have an educational expert on their team. And what a fabulous resource that is. They can absolutely go to their educator and say, look, I'm having a bit of trouble coming up with play ideas for my child. Can you guide me? What have you noticed they're most interested in? How can I set that up at home? What are some suggestions?
Yeah, look, that's a fantastic segue, I think, into one of the things that we wanted to talk about behind me today, Thrive by 5, which is the campaign for reform, essentially, of our early learning system so that we have a high-quality, universally accessible early learning system for every Australian. And it is this relationship between the system and the parent, because it is... This phase of life is just so important, those first 5 years. But as a country, I don't think we do as well as we might in supporting both parents and children in those first 5 years. We don't really have a system. Nobody's really responsible for it. It's a bit of a mismatch of responsibilities between the Commonwealth and the state. And even the childcare system itself really was never set up for the purposes of being an early learning system. It's been creeping in that direction, but it was really set up as something to look after children when parents were at work. And it doesn't even do that terribly well because it's very expensive and really discourages and creates some real challenges for some families. So the campaign that I lead from here in Perth, but it's a national campaign, is really to give voice to people like you, Maggie and Kaylene, and also to the hundreds, probably thousands of others who really, over a very long period of time now, have wanted to elevate the early years in the national consciousness. In a way, it's about reimagining early childhood and putting it front and centre where it really belongs. And this, it's a complex system because it does involve what we might regard as the life of families at home, but it also is this public space where people come together, where parents have interactions with practitioners, early educators, and where a whole range of other services are also potentially on offer and can be provided. So our campaign is really trying to pull together many voices but with one message, because we know that that's the only way you get cut through on the national political stage. if we're all out there saying different things at different times, it's very hard to get a grip on the national public policy process. And there's no obvious reason why early childhood should be on the agenda. It's in a way come on the agenda because COVID has sort of revealed some of the weaknesses in our early learning system. But there's no reason why it will stay there. We had a brief glimpse of what the future might look like with the 3 months of free childcare. It had a few problems with it, but nevertheless, there were a bunch of parents that came in and got access to early learning centres that wouldn't otherwise have actually had that contact. And we had some extraordinary stories from some Aboriginal controlled services where they saw families that they hadn't really seen before, and they were able to find ways of supporting them and connecting with them, which have become quite valuable. So we sort of know what a great system looks like, but we're a long way from that system. And the only way we're going to get there is if we have, if many people raise their voice and make the early years the priority that I think many of us on this call realise they should be. I might just throw quickly to both Dr. Kaylene and also to Maggie about the whole question of reform in this area. Then I want to leave some time for some questions because there's a bunch of people that have some wonderful questions that we need to get to. So first I might throw to you, Maggie. What's your reflection on the campaign?
Well, I think what we discovered during the COVID-19 was how we actually threw early childhood educators under the bus. There was this complete lack of value for them. And that's something I've been saying for a long time, that, you know, they are not respected in terms of, especially our 4-year trained, absolutely jet gang early childhood educators. So this is their life's work. Again, you know, and very much decisions made about all of how this works from people, you know, way up in those corridors of power who actually don't realise, you know, the intricacies of what we've been talking about today, the absolute fundamental importance of this first 5 years. My challenge is, again, that I really believe we need to, I'm not sure they're going to ever go for the whole lot, but I think we need to at least negotiate. We need absolutely universal free, at least 3 days a week for children in that 3 to 4 window. It doesn't matter who you are, because it would help those who absolutely have to have their children in childcare because they need to work, to be able to afford to work more than that. Because there are some who, by the time they've done those 3 days, they've actually earned not enough to be able to make the difference. And I think that is really problematic. I also think it makes it more easy for our vulnerable families to be able to access the system. It's much easier. There's no questions. And I think we do need to really look at, are we investing enough to lift the abs so that everybody, all of our centres are of high quality so that those needs of our little ones are met. And I believe all of that together, absolutely, I'm right behind you.
Great. Doctor?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the research is really clear that having having access to high quality early childhood education provides better developmental outcomes for vulnerable Australians, vulnerable young Australians, or those from disadvantaged backgrounds. And it's also really clear that exposure to 1 or even better 2 years, as Maggie said, of that preschool, again, high quality early childhood education really benefits our children, and the benefits are really long term there. Not only are they better set up to start school, but they're likely to have more success at school, more likely to be retained until grade 12. They're actually more likely to get better jobs and be paid a higher wage when they leave, have better health outcomes, remarkably, even long term, and be less involved in, you know, criminal activity. The benefits to society are well proven. I'm really fortunate that I work with a number of early years providers who are absolutely committed to quality. They know many in that. I'm actually yet to meet anyone working in the early years sector who doesn't know how critically important this is. The sector is across this. The sector knows that quality matters. The issue is, I guess, ensuring that all children, and particularly disadvantaged children, are able to actually access those services, I think.
Great. Now let's get to some questions because there are a bunch of them. So I'll get you, I'll just get Maggie and Doctor, if you could just give quick answers because we want to try and give everybody a bit of a crack. Cord from Perth. What should I look for when looking for a kindy to enrol my daughter in? I've read a lot about kindies becoming like year one and expecting too much from our children. When I look into kindy classes, what should I look for?
Kaylene.
Do you want to jump in on this one, Maggie? Or?
No, Kaylene, it's yours.
I was just going to say that for the research really clearly shows that when they talk about high quality early childhood education, the biggest parameter that determines that quality is having a quality relationship between your child and your child's educator. It's kind of not the bells and whistles of the centre. It's actually the quality of the interactions that your child has with their educator. So what I would do, if you've got a few options available to you, is go in and meet the educators, take your child, see who they connect best with, just watch how they interact with the other children of your child's age and make your decision based on that. You know, if you've got to go with one thing, I would go with where the money lies, which is with these, those quality interactions.
And
Maggie,
also, can I just say,
sorry, yeah.
if you have your children in a centre and you go to collect them and they don't want to go home and they want to go on Saturday, that means that the relationship is absolutely fabulous. It's not they don't love you, but they're loving them just about as much most days.
Beautiful. Now, a question from Rhiannon Blake. As Maggie explains, the toddler years can be very stressful on parents. I'm sure most of us here understand the need for extended patience and understanding through the epic meltdowns. How do we explain this to our partners and extended family or friends who may not be educators or have the training experience to understand this is normal developmental behaviour that shouldn't be punished?
Oh, absolutely. And this is one of the tricky ones. I've done a couple of podcasts on my parental as anything, that we turn up into our parenting world with our own story from our own childhood. So what's challenging is that females, this is a sweeping generalization, we tend to be absolutely analysing every decision we make, working out with our girlfriends, is there another decision? They go and read things. We're always on to improvement. And our guys is kind of like, yep, I'm doing the best I can right now. And this is how it was for me. So again, getting our co-parents on the same page. I've written articles. I'm sure there are more online. We do need to have conversations at times that go, it is hard work. So are we reacting? And if we're reacting, then we've got to look at ways that we are able to keep ourselves calm, because one of the things we know is that while our toddlers are having storms, the idea is not for us to join them. Having that message that parents need to still be parents, having parental swagger is really important. And this is where dads get a bit confused. Yes, you absolutely are the parent. There are times that we just say no once, and we don't need to escalate because we may have had someone yelling at us because we didn't listen or it didn't work. We just go, no, the answer's no. And we move on. So it's really an ongoing relationship building, but the last thing you can do is criticize or kind of assume that they're doing a lousy job and you're doing a good one, because on any given day, we can all have a moment that we regret, and we need to be able to kind of do it as a team nowadays rather than as two different parents side by side.
Yeah, the other thing that I often speak to parents about is, just as children learn to walk and talk in stages, they learn to calm themselves down from big feeling states in stages as well. First, as parents, we do all the calming for our babies, for example, by shushing, patting, rocking, often through those really physical means. And as they hit toddlerhood, often they're doing a little more, but we still need to help them. We still actually need to help our children calm down because they still haven't developed the essential brain wiring or had the necessary life experience to fully calm themselves down yet. Now, the wording I use with parents, which to be honest helped me as a parent when my children were going through those, toddler meltdowns that they all go through, because it doesn't take an awful lot to overwhelm their capacity to calm themselves down and to need your help, is just like I wouldn't get cranky with my toddler for falling down when they're learning to walk. There's no advantage in getting cranky at a toddler who demonstrates that they can't handle the level of emotion that they're currently experiencing. It's actually the same thing. They've fallen down. And so in the same way as parents, we need to stay calm, be there for them, help them kind of get back up again. But I think that reframing really helped me as a parent, and I know that it's helped others too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting actually, watching other parents parent I found quite useful as well. I saw a woman in a supermarket with a toddler that was having a meltdown, and she just quietly said, "Can you see any other little girls that are behaving like this? And just for that moment, she just looked around, and then all of a sudden it stopped. I thought, what a complete act of genius.
Another one that works like that, Jay, is asking them a question like, can you, if you say good night to the birdies, you say, can you see the birdies? Oh, is Daddy home? And that takes them from the primitive brain into the questioning part of the brain. They often just pause. But it doesn't always work. But if you catch it early enough, it's a gem, absolute gem.
Now, a question from Renee. Toddlers being physical with others. What do we do about that?
Okay, so I'll jump in on that one. The same sort of thing is what we tend to find is that, yes, you can scream out big feelings, or you can kick and stomp, or you use your physical body. So again, sometimes that's what happens with their frustrations, because they can't get their needs met. So my toppers tip is if that's something that your toddler has a tendency of doing, stay nearby in case that's about to happen. And you just reach out really quickly and scoop that hand up and say, I'm not going to let you hurt them. It's okay to be frustrated when he takes your truck. I'm just not going to let you hurt them, because they actually need our help sometimes to stop that. It's actually not a choice. It just happens. And the same as a bit around biting is very similar. That's very rarely a malicious attempt to absolutely hurt somebody. There's a whole lot of reasons underneath it, and it's a habit that we want to break. But if we do it with tenderness rather than firm punishment, and we give them another choice when they're frustrated, or another thing to chew, oh, you look like you want to chew, let's go and get an apple, then you can shift that into another state rather than seeing it as the naughty, bad child who needs to be punished.
The other thing I'd add to that, Jay, if I can, is that that's exactly right. I mean, our children, when they're behaving in ways like that, are simply demonstrating that they haven't yet mastered how to behave in that situation yet. So they need you to teach them. One of the other ways, rather than just in the moment teaching as Maggie's described, which is really important, but one of the other ways to embed that teaching is to get our kids to practice things. Children learn best when they're calm and engaged and having fun with you. So saying to them even a few hours later, hey, that was really tricky when you were, cranky about not having your turn with the truck yet. Do you want to practice what you can do next time? Do you want to start being you, or do you want to start being your friend? And we can swap around and we can actually have a practice so that you know what to do next time you're in that situation. And you can make it fun through role play. And it really is, think like a teacher, really embed that learning. If it's an ongoing issue, grab some library books on the topic to, again, embed what they can do instead. It's all learning for our little ones. And
using puppets works extremely well as well. The two puppets do it, and then they just immerse themselves into that. It's much better than a lecture or a lesson, because they haven't got the brain architecture to actually understand what you're doing.
Now, there's another question from Jess, and I know this comes up. It's really about this whole idea of children that are over 5. And, I think it's this anxiety about, well, is it all over? Is it too late? And I think what a lot of the child development experts would tell us is that children's brains are plastic, and obviously the first 5 years are critical, but there's always opportunities for to be able to grow. So I might just, unless you have anything more on that one, there's another question I want to really get to.
Yeah, it's never too late, basically.
Yeah. As mother of twins, when I listen to these talks, I find myself thinking about how I can possibly offer the level of comfort and support to both babies simultaneously. How would I suggest I manage that when they're both in need of comfort?
Oh, I love that question. And it was so funny because I actually chatted to a mum a few years ago who was exactly in that situation. I said to her, look, why don't you throw yourself on the floor, arms flat on the floor, and just let them climb all over you just for a while, because they're both going to be able to access you physical body wise. And the fact you've just thrown yourself on the floor unexpectedly will trigger a sense of novelty in amongst that. And really, this is the whole thing, that as parents, we can never completely meet all the needs of our children when they're toddlers. We just can't, because they want more of us. And I've just had that with my one of my granddaughters leaving Sydney, coming back home. And oh my God, her heart was so broken because she didn't want Nanny to go. And it was a massive, quite a bit of time to be able to de-escalate and bring her down into. In the end, I came up with drawing little hearts on hands so that we can take a piece of us with us. And at the end of the day, you've got some children who are really much harder to be able to meet their core needs, and they will have louder responses. And that is just who they are. And gradually, with exactly what Kaylene said, they will gradually get better at that, whereas some other children just won't have that high level of need.
Mm.
Yeah, I'll just add there that, you know, I've had 3 kids who are all fairly close in age, and this situation arises all the time for us as parents, doesn't it? Sometimes it's a bit of a triage system, you know, who's most in need of it at the time. Sometimes it's literally, as Maggie's described, a kind of stacks on situation. But then, you know, they're there while you're modelling for them how to meet another's needs too. Even if they're not at the front of the queue, that's still good learning for them. That's okay. And ultimately, what I would say to that parent too is that you don't have to be perfect. Honestly, all the research tells us that good enough, getting things right with our toddlers often enough is honestly good enough in promoting good outcomes for our children. It's not about being perfect. It would be impossible anyway, but it's good enough truly is good enough.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. Now, look, this has been the fastest 1 hour of my life. So I'm sad to say that we've got to actually start wrapping up now. But and I know there are a number of questions here, and we might try and circle back to get some answers for you, because a number of them we haven't been able to get to. But the first thing I want to do is to thank everybody who's jumped online today. It's fantastic, the number of people that have been involved and stay involved. What I really would like to do is to tell you that what we've heard today is, I think, incredible advice, obviously about the importance of the early years, but also practical things that you can do to actually assist. And if you're a practitioner, the conversations you can have with others. If you're just a friend of somebody with children, or a grandparent or caregiver, these have all been fantastic pieces of advice. We think that I got involved in politics because I wanted to make a difference. And the longer I stayed involved, the more I realised that all the things that I was worried about fixing, many of them had their origins in the early years. And so if you really want to shift the dial on disadvantage or opportunity, or if you're concerned about prosperity of our nation, or just the happiness and well-being of children and the ability for them to form great relationships and have happy lives, I just can't imagine a better place to spend your time and energy. And that's what I've decided to do. And that's what this campaign is really about. It's about putting the early years on the national political agenda where it belongs. You know, right at the moment, I mean, it's not every good idea captures the political attention. There's a whole lot of important causes, and they're all fighting for oxygen. But I'm convinced this one actually has found its time. I think that this has been put on the national political agenda by circumstances. You know, COVID has really put it there, and I think now it's there. I think people are beginning to see that it's such an important part of us rebuilding out of this crisis. So we'd love you to get involved in the campaign. You can see behind me, join the campaign, thriveby5.org.au. If you go there, you can register, and there are no obligations. You can play as big or as small a role as you like. You can be a Maggie Dent and speak publicly. You and Kaylene speak publicly about these matters, or you can be somebody that just adds their voice and writes a letter to a member of Parliament, and everything in between. So there's opportunities to do any and all of these things. If you've already signed up, please share it with friends, because as we grow, the truth is that politicians understand pressure. They understand that their voters who get them elected, if they have a perspective, then that's going to resonate with them. We've always had a first-class argument. What we've got to do now is mobilise a political movement for change to actually turn our quality arguments into quality policy. So thank you so much for all of you for being involved. I think this is a winnable campaign, and it's people like Maggie and Dr. Henderson and others who have been talking about these issues for a very long time now, who need our support so that we can make the changes our children need. So thank you all so much for being part of this today. Thank you. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Dr. Henderson.
Thanks so much, Jay. Thanks, Maggie.